In this video series, I decided to put together a more complicated board than normal. In many cases, when you're pouring your epoxy, you only use one color of epoxy for this river. In the process I'm going to discuss in this video, I'm actually pouring 2 layers of epoxy. The first one is blue, and that's what this video is going to cover. It's going to cover the mixing, putting in the coloring, and the pour of the first epoxy layer, which is the blue layer. Future videos will discuss me putting rocks and sand on top of the blue and white layer and then surfacing and finishing the board. So by the end of this video, you should be able to do the following. Be able to mix up the epoxy in the right amount to pour your first layer. Number 2, you should be able to mix the different colors and understand what you're doing in mixing 3 different colors of epoxy to use, and a clear coat. So one will be a dark blue, one will be a light blue, one will be a white, and one will be a clear, and you'll see how you use that clear. And then how to create a wave pattern or a water flow pattern on that first layer of epoxy. With that, let's go ahead and get started into the process and cover it in detail. At this point in the project, I've decided that I'm going to make 2 pours because I'm going to make a river pour that is supposed to look like an actual river or close to it. After the tabletop epoxy is hardened, I will pour a clear coat over the top. I purchased these rocks to make them look like river rocks that after I pour the blue in there, I will lay along like they were rapids. And then I'll spread a little more white and light blue in the water. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the epoxy, the blue tabletop in there, and I'll try to put a few white streaks going along. And then later I'll come back, like I said, and I'll put some actual rocks in there. So I don't want to overdo the white. So I'm going to mix up 30 ounces of tabletop epoxy, and I'll take 10 ounces of that and I'll separate it out into different dishes or cups so that I can mix the white and the light blue in here. So that's the next step, is to mix up the epoxy. First 30 ounces of tabletop, it's 2 parts of resin, 1 part of hardener, that means 20 ounces of resin, and 10 ounces of hardener. And that's what we'll be doing next. The color pigments I'll be using today are primarily Eye Candy Ocean Blue. For the dark blue, I'll use Runyon Blue, which I haven't tried before. It's a light blue, so I'm hoping it'll work out good. It's why I bought it, so I can mix it with some dark blue when I'm doing waves and stuff. So it's not going to be mixed directly in with the dark blue. I'm going to have to separate out some color so I can pour it separately. And for the rapids action, I've got some Charcuterie white paste. I've also got a couple other pigments if I decide I want to use them. If I want a little green color, I've got some Ecopoxy Seafoam Green, some Charcuterie Brilliant Gold, and some Ecopoxy Sand Bar. Those are in case I decide I want to put a little sand edge along the edge of the shore of the river. The next step is to start mixing up the epoxy and then separating it out into different cups so I can have different colors available as I pour. So at this point, we're ready to mix the epoxy. Again, I said I was going to put 20 ounces of resin and 10 ounces of hardener.
Work hard, get dough. I can't get no sleep, please make my life more simple. Miles inside these shoes so I don't stomp, I tiptoe. Fell 1,000 times and still I roll no limp though. But I wouldn't trade a thing for what I have. I go hard, do what I need to make it last. They say
okay, the odors aren't bad, so I'm going to go ahead and mix the rest of this without my respirator.
I'm doing great now, just in case they ask. In the booth and I lay.
You'll notice I'm mixing this up on a little table that I've put tie back on. It's a portable stand I use. Okay, I've been stirring for almost 5 minutes now. It looks pretty mixed up, so I'm going to say that's good. And I want to take about 10 ounces or so out of here and put it over in these cups. So we have about 12 ounces set aside now that I will use for different colors of epoxy, and I'll sub these out into other small cups if necessary. My primary color is going to be the dark blue, so that's my next step, is to mix in the dark blue. Put quite a bit in there at first. Eye Candy Ocean Blue. Recall, I want this opaque, and you can see it gets on the side, so you mix it in off the side, and you slowly mix it in. Pull it up to see if it's opaque. Just a little more in it for measure. Yeah, I like that better. So now what I'm looking at, if you've seen me do this in other videos, is I'm trying to look through the mix down, but because it's thicker, that doesn't give me a true version of opaqueness. So what I'm doing is I am actually pulling up the epoxy on my stick, and I'm looking through the epoxy to the stick to see if I actually see the stick underneath the epoxy. And when I don't, I know that I've got a pretty opaque mix. And that's where we're at right now. And so the next step is going to be to pour this into the form. I calculated out to have about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch high in the form. At this point, I'll let it settle out a little. What I've done here is I've taken a stick and put a 1/4 inch mark on it just so I can measure the actual depth of what's going on with the epoxy. So right now, you can see it's less than 1/4 inch in there. It's probably about 1/8 of an inch by this measurement. And everything hasn't settled out yet, so we will go ahead and pour a little more.
Let me see who you are, who you really are. Yeah. Don't need you here to say you're sorry, 'cause if you're gonna leave me, then just do it. Don't take it slow, don't be gentle. No, I just gotta know if you're gonna leave me, then just do it.
So my next step then is I'm going to take some of this epoxy and I'm going to pour half of it into this cup over here, and I'm going to use that then to mix some light blue, and this is Runyon Blue.
This is something you would never do. Here we are in your car. Let me see who you are.
At this time, I'm just lightly pouring streams of the lighter blue, Runyon Blue, into the darker blue. And I want to make sure that I don't intermix them very much, because I don't want the light blue to just fade away. I want it to kind of look like part of the water and ripples. So it's kind of a light touch.
The hard part is I don't want to mix it. right, now that this has been sitting here for a bit, settling in, the next thing I want to do is to mix up some Charcuterie white, and this is meant to be able to produce cells kind of like foam and waves. And so my next step is to do a quick bubble pop, and then I'm going to try to create some ripples or some wave action. What you see me doing here is I'm just going to pour some clear epoxy over the top. It might be better if I had waited for this to dry, but that's what I'm doing. And now I'm going to take some of this white and I'm going to layer that up here on the top. And now I'm going to use this heat gun to try to distribute it.
At this point in the video, what I'm doing is I'm using that heat gun there to move the white over the top of the blue, trying to make it look like rapids on top of the river. And so I get it at an angle, and it's an experimentation thing that you do to try to get the right angle, and you move it around. And here you see me laying down some more white. I forgot to put the clear coat on first as an interface, and so I'm putting clear coat. Now I'll put the white, and then I'll continue to move the white around with the heat gun until I get the look I want. The next step after I get the white spread out with the heat gun will be to torch it to try to disperse the cells and make it look more like a frothy look, as well as pop the bubbles. This is how it looked after moving the white around. I kind of like the rapid look, and now the next step will be to let this dry overnight. And tomorrow I will put in the rocks and sand and things to make it look like actual rapids in a canyon.
Well, that's it for this video in the series of where we went through and covered the initial layer of epoxy in this multi-layer epoxy board. I'm pretty happy with how it looks and how it turned out. I like the way the waves are looking on the blue, looking like ripples in the water. That was the goal. Tomorrow, once the epoxy is hardened, I will be hot gluing the rocks and pouring in some sand to make it look like sand and rocks in the valley there. And after that's done, I will be filling up the rest of the void up to the top of the boards with clear epoxy. That'll be in the next video that I produce. We'll go through that whole process, and I'll show you how I go about making sure the rocks and the sand stay in place where I want them. And following that video, then we will cover surfacing, sanding, finishing, and polishing the board. I hope this series is giving you some confidence in approaching and doing your first river charcuterie board if you haven't done one in the past. And if you haven't done a multi-layered one, maybe giving you some ideas for that. And if you think I deserve it, give me a thumbs up and a like. And also, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel, hit the all bell, and you'll be notified when the last 2 videos come out in this series. Have a great day. Hope you're getting out in the shop and enjoying yourself. Take care.